Hello and welcome to this tutorial on Unity UI interactions and buttons. We're going to have a look at this Apple Clicker game example that I made, see how buttons are set up in this main menu to have different kinds of animations. Have a look at this cookie clicker style game example where you click the big golden apple here to generate some vitamins which you can then spend to buy strawberries or lemons which automatically generate you more vitamins. To create this, I again use the Cute Cartoon mobile GUI, which is available for free on the Unity Asset Store. Lastly, we're going to have again a look at the 2D platformer example and see how this hard panel here is hooked up to the lives which are tracked in the 2D platformer controller. Creating a Unity button is incredibly simple. All that you have to do is just click on the UI creation here and make a button. It will of course create a canvas if you don't have one already and an event system which is managing the input from your mouse or keyboard or controllers and piping these to the buttons so they can react to the input events. The button itself is a UI element like any other, so the positioning and size management works just like any other UI element. On the button we can see an image and a button component. The image component is then targeted by the button and will be the raycasting target for any kind of mouse tracking. So the image will define the size where you can click the button. So we have to make sure that the image is marked as a raycast target and is attached as well to the button and set as target graphic, but this is all set up by default if you just create one. We also have a text on the button by default. This is just a child element and you can delete this or write something else or put more images on, whatever you want to have on the button as a symbol. If I go to play mode, this button is already fully functional. I can click it, I can hover over it, and it will actually be able to receive input events right away. By default, the button interactions will target the image, and we can see here that it will change the image color based on the type of interaction, so whether we highlight, press, select, or have the button disabled. In our menu example, we can see three different ways to make buttons react to those input events. The start button simply has the color tint transitions set up for different kinds of colors. So when I hover over it, it will turn red. And when I click it, it will turn gray. The options button has different kinds of sprites for being clicked or being hovered over. So it uses the sprite swap transition and the respective sprites are dragged here in the fields. The quit button is animated, so if I hover over it, it will scale up, and if I click it, it will scale down a bit. And this is being done using the animation transition. And if you actually select that, you can create an animation controller with animations set up automatically. So you can see here this use auto-generated animation buttons, and then it will create a controller and animations for you. You will get a predefined animation controller for mechanism use with the parameters for highlighted, pressed, selected, or disabled. The events will be sent by the button when clicked or pressed or highlighted. But you will still have to create animations. For example, here I made one that simply changes the scale when highlighted from 1 to 1.12. We can then observe how the animation state machine changes animation based on the interaction that I do in the scene. And it will play back the respective animation which is targeted by the transition caused by whatever parameter is being sent by the button setup here. Now I would like to load my game scene when I press the start button. For this I have made a main menu script, and this script has just one function that will load us our scene. So I just call the scene manager and load the scene which is supplied by the parameter here in the load scene function. I have added that script just on the canvas, but you can add it anywhere in the scene that you would like. Now to hook up that function to our button click, we have to add an event listener to the onClick event of the button. You can do this actually just in the inspector here by clicking this little plus icon. Then you will have to supply the game object where the script is located on. So we're just going to drag the canvas in here. Then select the component that has the function. That would be our main menu script. And here we select the load scene function. The inspector can visualize and supply most types of parameters. For us, that is just a simple string that the function needs to get when it's being called. So I can actually put the value of the parameter in here. That would be game. I would like to load the game scene. And then when the button is clicked, the function from the script is being called. One word here though, the function has to be public and it cannot be a static function. It has to be an instance function. If you are comfortable messing around with events, the Unity event system and delegates, you can also add your listeners in a script. Usually if you have access to the button component, you would do it like this. So for the onClick event, we add a listener and then supply the function. However, because here we have a parameter, we cannot do it like this. So we could, for example, simply use a lambda expression here to call our load scene function when the button event is being called and put in our parameter like this. Or you can also create a new anonymous delegate here with the load scene function inside. Let's next have a look at our Apple Clicker game. Here we have the big Apple button in the center. We have a scoreboard anchored to the top left, the item board anchored to the top right, and the shop anchored to the middle here, or the bottom right. So inside the shop there is the shops for the lemons and the strawberries here, which have the buttons. And the buttons are hooked up to the Apple Clicker script. Actually, the whole game simply runs with one script that I just called Apple Clicker game here. So the Apple button is hooked up to the Apple Clicker game. So we have a click Apple function, we have a buy strawberry function, and a buy lemon function. The Apple Clicker script will then keep track of updating our scores, how many berries we have, how many lemons we have, how many vitamins per second a berry makes, how many vitamins per second a lemon makes, and what they cost, what should be written on these buttons here, and is basically managing the whole game. Let's have a look at the script now in the editor. Here is our values for vitamins, lemons, and berries, how many we have of each type. Then we have the public values here exposed in the inspector for our text objects, so we have access to them and can change whatever text is being displayed. And of course, being exposed here, how much vitamins per second berries and lemons make and whatever they are costing. Then in update, we calculate how many vitamins we get every frame. The vitamins are a float value because it's possible to get a fraction of a vitamin every frame. So we have to calculate them with floating point numbers. But of course, being displayed, we cast it into an integer and then format it so it has at least 5 leading zeros. Then we have the functions that respond to our button clicks. The click apple function will be called when we click the big golden apple and of course simply increase our vitamin count. And the vitamin text is updated here in update, so we don't need to do anything else. In the buy berry function, we first check if we have enough berries to actually, enough vitamins, excuse me, to buy a berry. And then if we do, we subtract those, we increase our berry count, and also double the berry price. So the game doesn't actually have a complete runaway economy. Of course, then we have to update the text displayed for how many berries we have and how much one berry will cost. Let's see this in action one more time. If I click the apple, our vitamin counter will go up, and if I buy a strawberry, the price will increase. We get one more strawberry, and now we generate vitamins gradually over time. In the 2D platform example, we have a bit of a more complicated situation because we have a script which is on the king character here that is managing the lives and listening to the collision events. And then when the king gets hurt, we have to update the UI. For this, we have the Hearts UI script, which has an array of UI images, which keeps track of the hearts. We can see here in the inspector how the hearts are linked in the array. And then whenever we want to remove a heart, we call this function that simply checks if there's any hearts visible, and if yes, it will remove the last one, or actually simply disable the last visible one in the array. And that function would then be called in Platformer Controller whenever we take damage through a reference that we simply drag in the inspector. Now, this will cause a lot of referencing and exposed data in the inspector to accumulate in the platformer controller over the long run. So we can actually write this a little simpler. Since we know there's only ever going to be one Hearts UI in a scene, we can use a sort of simplification of the singleton pattern. For this, we would make a private field that is static and of type Hearts UI. We call that instance. Then in start, we assign the instance to ourselves, and we make a static method instead of our regular method. The static method would then simply call our instance method, like so. Of course, they cannot be called the same, so you could simply make an underscore here to make sure that the naming doesn't conflict, and then make this private. Now in Platformer Controller 2D, we don't have to have this reference here. We can simply call the static method from the class, like so. This simplified singleton pattern is incredibly useful whenever you have any kind of interaction that you need to program where you know one participant is guaranteed to only have one instance in the scene. So, to sum up, we learned how to make a UI button, how to change whatever type of transition you want to use, be it color change, sprite change, or an animation. Then we learned how to use the onClick event to add event listeners. So for example, the load scene function here, which is being called with the game parameter. So our game scene is being loaded. One quick word here, in order to actually load the game scene here, you have to make sure that the game scene is added to your build settings. In the build settings, make sure that the scene is here. If it's not actually inside this build settings, you will get an error that the scene cannot be loaded. Then we had a look at this apple clicker game, which uses an abstract kind of approach, and all the game logic is in just one script. So whenever you don't have a lot of Unity objects with separate kind of behavior, that is something that you can consider. And we had a look at the Hearts UI of the 2D platformer game here, and learned how you could use the simple singleton pattern in order to make your code easily accessible from the outside without having to deal with too much drag and drop in the Unity inspector.